Reading from Acts 13. Now, in the church at Antioch, there were prophets and teachers, Barnabas, Simeon, called Niger, Lucius of Cyrene, Manaen, who had been brought up with Herod the Tetrarch, and Saul. While they were worshiping the Lord and fasting, the Holy Spirit said, "Set apart for me Barnabas and Saul for the work to which I've called them." So after they had fasted and prayed, they placed their hands on them and sent them off. Good morning. Welcome. If you're our guest today, we're pleased that you're with us, and we hope that you will be blessed by the morning and are being blessed by the morning. If you haven't already done so, fill out one of the little cards that's in the pew rack and just drop it in the offering box by the door. We would like to have a record of your presence with us. If you haven't already done so, turn to the Acts 14 and also Acts 15 would be those texts. Last week I mentioned to you the East Coast Bible Symposium that's going to be in February 19th through the 21st. Unfortunately, that conflicts right with Winterfest. So some of you have already committed to Winterfest, but not everybody is. And I would encourage you to consider at least going up for part of the symposium. It will cost you nothing if you just go to the classes. If you want to lodge there, stay there, you can register online. And I would encourage you to register online anyway. It will cost you nothing unless you choose housing and food and all of that. But register so they'll know how many to count on and how many to prepare for. Trisha and I are going to try to present to you some material, but before she comes up here, let me say that the very first missionaries that I can remember hearing speak when I was a child was Don Darty, who came to my congregation when I was very, very young. I mean, I was probably under 5 when I remember him first coming. But he was a missionary from Paris, and he had been in Paris for just a few years at that time. He actually was a missionary to Paris for about 35 years. Don grew up in Philippi, West Virginia, which was just 36 miles down the road from where I grew up in Barrickville, West Virginia. And about every 2 years, he would come to our small West Virginia congregation and paint brilliantly colorful pictures in my mind of worlds beyond my small town West Virginia hills. Of course, we always sang "Send the Light" like we did this morning and other songs like that. And we committed ourselves to pray for the work in Paris. And congregationally, we would make a covenant with him to financially support him for another 2 years. And about every 2 years, he would show up. And for me, though, it was more than about money. For me, it opened my mind to possibilities far beyond my present existence or knowledge or thought processes, to worlds beyond. Because of my fond memory of that and my fond memory of that experience, I have always been an encourager for missionaries to come by and tell their stories. Because I very much want the children of today to have their worlds opened too. I want them to be able to see possibilities beyond and to grasp a vision of what could be. When we think of church, we tend to think of singing and communion and offering and prayer and sermon, of course. But if we're paying attention, I believe we will also discover that first century church sometimes included stories of worlds beyond brought by missionaries who were reporting their activities. In Acts chapter 14, for example, we find Paul and Barnabas reporting on the trip that we just read they were sent on. And it says from Attalia they sailed back to Antioch, where they had been committed to the grace of God for the work they had now completed. On arriving there, they gathered the church together and reported all that God had done through them and how he had opened the door of faith to the Gentiles. And then just a few verses later, we find Paul and Barnabas making a similar report in Jerusalem. When they came to Jerusalem, they were welcomed by the church and the apostles and elders, to whom they reported everything God had done through them. And then a few chapters later, we find the same kind of thing happening again, except this time it's Luke and Paul who are bringing the report. And Luke says, when we arrived at Jerusalem, the brothers and sisters received us warmly. The next day, Paul and the rest of us went to see James. All the elders were present. Paul greeted them and reported in detail what God had done among the Gentiles through his ministry. Well, it's very much in that spirit that Trisha and I come to you this morning. Come on up, Trisha. Not to inform you what the Lord's done through us, but to inform you of the work that you have a part of in Geita, Tanzania. And it's very much a part of what you're doing there as well as here. Where do we begin, Trisha?
Well, why don't we start by thanking Teresa and her parents who helped us on both ends of this trip.
Well, that sounds like a good idea. We would have found the trip so much more tiring had it not been for the graciousness of Teresa and her offer to drive us to the Miami airport, and then her parents, Terry and Connie Casey, and their willingness to house us or put us up for the night on both ends of the trip. So we left the trip, rested from their hospitality, and then when we arrived back, we had a chance to rest because of their hospitality again.
But even so, it was a very exhausting trip.
It was. It was, first of all, a 12-hour flight from Miami to Istanbul, Turkey, and then a 6-hour flight, 6.5-hour flight from Istanbul to Kigali, Rwanda, where we arrived at 1 a.m. in the morning, Rwanda time. And then it was a 10-hour drive from Kigali, Rwanda, into Geita, Tanzania. Now, that was only 253 miles, but you got to understand the conditions, and there was customs and border crossings, and all that took a couple hours as well.
The roads in Rwanda were pretty good.
And that's true. They weren't not too bad, but then we arrived at Tanzania border, and the roads suddenly got a lot worse. First of all, there were bad paved roads, and then there were bad dirt roads to follow.
And the fact that it was during the rainy season of the year, of course, made it quite a bit worse than it would have been during the dry season. There were large holes, there were pieces of road totally missing, there were crevices made by the rivulets of water that were running over the road. And
actually, there were times in which we were not sure, okay, do we try to go through this deep water, this deep mud, or we try to get off the road and go around it? And sometimes they chose to go around it rather than staying on the road. It was that bad. I didn't find the condition of the roads as challenging, though, as the variety of road traffic.
Do you mean the bicycles?
Well, yes, the bicycles, the bicycle taxis, and the motorcycles and the motorcycle taxis, and the donkey carts and the pedestrians all seem to be moving here, there, and yonder without any sense of road rules at all.
These pictures, however, don't show the reality of the crowds and the confusion that was in the streets there. It is much worse in town than these pictures depict. And there are buses that are small vans that they were capable of cramming more people into and out of than we can imagine. They were always pulling in and off the side of the road and picking up people, and they all had random American decals on their windows. And let's not forget the police. For the most part, the policemen there didn't have cars. They just would step out into the road, point to the side, and stop cars to do road checks. They did have radar guns, but they would try to get you to admit you had been speeding before showing you what their guns said and admitting you were actually going the speed limit. On one such stop in a village between Geita and Mwanza, it showed me that Neema House is becoming well known in that area. When the policeman asked where Cheryl worked, he knew this was an orphanage that helped take care of children.
Yes, sometimes they also had, serious weapons like AK-47s, those kind of weapons too, but not all of them did. Some of them just their presence.
Geita is a town of about 40,000 people in the town proper, but that's not all Geita is.
Geita is also a district, much like a county, but it has a population of like 800,000. And so I guess you could say that's metropolitan Geita. So, and the business district of the Geita town actually serves that whole district area. It's a rather populated area, even though it's kind of deceptively small if you just count the town population.
The largest employer of Geita would be the Geita gold mine, which effectively put Geita on the map. On the gold mine property is the international school where they speak English and where our grandsons attend school. This is also where the only westernized restaurant in Geita is, where it would be safe for Americans to eat.
The gold mine was started there in 2000, and as you can see, it has a really, really big presence in that area next to the town. It's a large operation.
Okay, let's talk about Neema House.
Okay, that's a good idea.
Neema House is located right on the northern edge of town, and it's actually uphill from the town.
And zooming in from space, you can actually see it pretty close and see it in pretty high detail. If you kind of watch this as this comes in, you see Lake Victoria up there, that dark place, and then here's the mine off to the left, and you can see the top edge of the town, and you see a bright spot kind of showing up kind of in the middle of the picture. Now watch carefully. Now this is the block in which Neema House is. And there's the main house of the Neema House. There's the baby house, the office, the guest house, and the kitchen. And the bright roof, it actually is the house where the McFaddens live, and it's real bright because it's a metal roof and it reflects the sun. So it's very loud when it rains.
Okay, why don't we let Cheryl give the congregation a tour of Neema House?
Okay. This video was done just right after we arrived there. And it was done for the board of directors.
So now we're going to take you inside Neema House and show you some of the projects that we've been working on outside and some of the things that we have planned. And you'll see some of the children who are outside playing right now too.
Hi, Jerry. Mumbo, Jerry.
As you can see, over the last year, we've put a concrete wall up over the perimeter. We did this in May. This is to increase the security for all of the children, especially the children with albinism, because there were so many attacks that were happening in the Geita area. Over here, next to the swings, we're building what's called an msonge, which is like a gazebo, and this will provide a shaded area for the kids. The kids like to eat outside. But that way it will be a shaded area, or anytime we have guests, parents that are coming to visit children, possible adoptive families, or even when we're doing interviews, there will be a place in the shade, protection from the wind and the rain or whatever, where people can sit. On the front of Neema House, we're hoping to add an enclosed porch area. This will serve as a mud room so that they don't have to leave shoes outside in the rain, and so that they're not trucking mud in all the time. It'll also serve as another room because we've grown so much. It's hard to divide kids in the home. So if we have weeks at a time where it's raining every day and they can't go outside to play, it will allow them to have another room so they can divide kids, take younger kids into one room to do one activity, and older kids could sit on the porch and do another activity. And then over here, we're also hoping to lay some concrete to make a sidewalk. As you can see, there's a dirt path going down to that home. That is now our baby home, but it just tracks mud when it's rainy season. It's just soggy mud. So we're hoping to lay some concrete down there to create an actual path. And then out here, outside also, we're hoping to build another play structure for the children. The swings that Joe and the Wish team built a few years ago are wonderful. The kids love them, swing on them every day, that it's not raining all day. But obviously it would be nice to have something else, like a climbing structure or something for the kids to play on. So we're hoping to work on something like that as well. So now we want to show you inside the main Neema House building. This is now the home for the children 1 year and up, or at least children after they start walking. We want to show you some of the changes and developments we've made inside this home. As you can see, we've added paint. We have pictures of all of our children that we've served here at Neema House, as well as all of our staff, and we're putting the handprints of all of the children at the bottom. We have a laundry room now. We have 2 new washing machines that we've added in the last few months because, as you can imagine, to handle laundry for 22 children, it's a big job. And so on days we don't have power, then we're washing laundry by hand, but it's just very, very time consuming. We're hoping that one day we'll be able to get a generator to help so that we can keep the machines running even when there's not power. This is the bathroom. It has 2 chos, which are like their floor toilets for them, as well as a shower, and they also have little children potties, their towels, labeled towel hooks, labeled soap dishes, and toothpaste and toothbrush and things for everybody. We now have a toy room that we've painted. It has a door that opens up to the outside so they can have some fresh air when they're in here playing. And then we've painted, we put numbers on the top, animals, and painted a little mural on the wall. And this is their toy room where they can come play during the day inside, just kind of trying to make it a fun, bright area for them. Here are the pictures of the children. Those are all the children that Neema House has served, with the exception of Musa. I've not yet gotten his picture up there. Of these children, this girl, this boy, and this boy have all gone home to their families. And this is the boy who went on to another home in Mwanza specifically for children with albinism. This is the boys' bedroom. We painted it blue and green so that it would kind of be boyish colors, but it would be bright. We have blue sheets, so they're obviously not always completely matched because we don't have 2 sets of them. And matching blankets, and just trying to make it nicer. This bed over here doesn't have a mosquito net because we don't have kids in there, but we have currently set up in here to have 10 children because we added these bunk beds to maximize the space. But obviously, as you can see, we could easily add at least a couple more bunk beds in here if we needed to. This is the room for boys ages 2 through 5. And then we have this room for the girls ages 2 through 5. We painted it pink and white to make it bright and cheery. Our staff was very excited about it being pink. We let them pick the color and they said, oh, pink for girls. So again, we're set up for 10 girls, but we could easily add a couple bunk beds and rearrange if we needed to in order to maximize our capacity. We're using all the pack and plays that have been brought previously in the toddler room. The toddler room is once they start walking, which is around a year usually, until they turn 2. And we currently have 7 toddlers in here. And we painted it a bright, kind of orangish, peachish color. And we put a changing table directly in here since these are the children in this home that are still wearing diapers. Currently they're all napping. It's very peaceful in this room, and that's wonderful. So this is kind of a tour of our main home and what it looks like. So now this is our new baby home that we've opened so that we have space just for these babies. As you can see in here right when you walk in the door, this is the play area, though Baraka is sleeping, where they have their own play mat. We've tried to paint it so it's bright. They have their own age-appropriate toys that they can put down on the floor. They can learn to crawl and sit without the older kids trampling them. So this is kind of their play area. This was really motivated so that they could get more specific, individualized attention to make sure that they're keeping up with their development, that they're able to play and not just being set down in different places. This is the bedroom. We just recently took the mama bed out of here so that we could even maximize space even more. We're going to have a few more cribs made because this home has filled up very quickly. These cribs were made in Tanzania, and we've had to add 1 pack and play because we've run out of cribs, but like I said, we're going to have probably 3 more put in here so that we can keep up with the demand and the need here and for all the infants that are coming to us. Here in my hands, I have Happiness. This is one of the malnourished babies that came to us in October. And when she came to us, she was 11 months, and she only weighed 3 kilos, which is about 7.5 pounds. It's smaller than any of my babies were at birth, but she's now got a little tummy on her. She's starting to crawl. She's laughing. She has big cheeks, and she's doing very, very well. Her mother comes and visits her every weekend, and is just very pleased. And here, this is kind of the changing room where they prep bottles, where they wash dishes and stuff, the changing area, and then there's a little bathroom for them. So this is the baby home. It's small, but it meets the needs that we have. We didn't have to do very much construction to turn it into a baby home, which was wonderful. Just very limited. We've added some solar lights in here as well. So thank you. This is kind of a tour of Neema House and what we have been doing. You can see the changes if you've been here before, and we're developing all the time, and we're excited to see what new developments will happen in this next year.
As I said, that was done for the board of directors, but I thought it was pretty appropriate to share with you so you could see what they're doing. They presently have 26 children, but they have bed space for 38 children. So they still have a little bit of room to grow. When they arrived a little over a year ago, they only had 9 in the home. So it has grown rather rapidly. And 3 of them presently are albino children, and they're at high risk because the witch doctors capture them and take their bones. They make some kind of formula, magic formula out of their bones. So that's the reason for the security wall. The albino children are very high risk. Cheryl mentioned the 3 additional cribs. That brings their number up to 38 for bedding, and they were delivered just before Christmas.
And she mentioned the climbing structure that was to be built, but you and Stephen, who is Scott's and Cheryl's yard worker, finished that before we left.
And that turned out to be more than I'd bargained for. Without anything like Ace Hardware, much less a Lowe's or Home Depot, getting supplies were a real challenge. I mean, even finding bolts the size I needed or nails the size I needed, much less the wood and everything. And it was a real challenge. And Stephen and I worked together on this, but he spoke only Swahili and I spoke only English. And so that was very interesting as well, but a really, really fine fellow. Now, why don't you tell them what impressed you most about Tanzania? Was it the hospitals or the shows, the roads, the market, the people, the enormity of the task that Cheryl and Scott have taken on? What is it?
Well, all of those impressed me in one way or another, but let's start with the hospitals. They are horrible. As you can see from these pictures, the wards all open up from the outside sidewalks, and the outside sidewalks are wet and muddy, so the inside of the wards are also very muddy. They have beds set side by side down 2 walls of a dirty, noisy rectangular room. There's people everywhere, standing around, sitting on the beds. And if you're a patient in a hospital there, someone must stay with you 24/7 because they have to provide any food that you're going to eat. They have to change your linens. They're totally the ones that will physically take care of you. We saw no private or even semi-private rooms in either the Geita or the Mwanza hospital. And I told John that if anything should happen to me there, medical-wise, I was not to be taken to the hospital. I would rather take my chances with him and Cheryl doing the best they could do to doctor me. Health care probably is our biggest concern for the McFaddens and the rest of the mission team over there, which includes 2 other families there in Geita, though they're not as directly involved with Neema House, but they do work with Cheryl and Scott.
You want to tell them about the show?
I'll pass.
I didn't figure she would want to, but the shows were the Tanzanian toilets. And I'll let you, that's a picture of it, I'll let you use your own imagination to how it works. But I don't think it was Trisha's favorite part of Tanzania. Cheryl, however, thoroughly enjoyed allowing her mother to experience the show. Of course, the house where the McFadden's lived was built by the Americans who were there before them, and so it has American facilities, and that's their house there.
I also found the market to be quite an experience. The pictures that you see here are very typical of most of the markets that we saw while we were there. They consist of small rows of houses, of small shops, not houses, of small shops. And the shops would each kind of have one aisle. You could walk into it and look what was on both walls and then come back out. There was dirt paths between the shops and often chicken and coops sitting there to sell or things set out on tables to buy. You can see the beans and rice, the staple foods there, are set out in large containers which you would scoop up and weigh the amount you wanted to buy.
The meat market was probably the most challenging. The meat just hang inside the door from the ceiling. The door was open, and you go in and cut a piece of meat off, or ask the butcher to cut a piece of meat off and buy it and take it home and cook it.
And that's why Cheryl will only buy early in the morning after the market opens. She wants to see the blood still dripping from the carcass.
Now, I was really taken by the housing structures there and the tremendous variety. The huts, mud huts, for example, in the villages were the primary, the way that the housing was. But then there were round huts that anytime you saw round huts, they were clusters together, and they were the centers for witch doctors. And so you could spot witch doctors along the road as you drove, because of that was their style of housing. And then there were mud huts with metal roof that seemed to be a little bit more desirable than the ones with a grass roof. And then there were handmade brick houses, single-family dwellings, and multi-family dwellings. Some of these were really small. They might have 1 or 2 rooms. I went to one apartment. It was 6 by 8, 6 feet by 8 feet. That was the size of the apartment, the whole thing. And a family lived there. But in addition to that, there are frame houses, much like you would find in America. And then there are these really nice walled, fine homes that are there that are very impressive, and they're found right beside a mud hut. I mean, you could have a whole bunch of mud huts around a house like that. So it was amazing to me, the tremendous contrast between the poor and the rich.
I want us to talk a little bit more now about Cheryl and Scott's work there and about their very busy and difficult schedule.
Okay, what would you like to say?
Well, the reason we saw the hospitals was mostly because we made quite a few trips there to see families who had a malnourished child, or we were picking up a child that was malnourished to take them to Neema House. The social worker at the Geita hospital has learned that Neema House is a safe place to put the children, and that Cheryl does a good job taking them in and nursing them back to health. Unfortunately, some of the children have been in such a critical state of health at the time they were taken in that their lives were hanging in the balance from the very beginning. The first 2 that proved not to be able to be saved died while we were there within about a week of each other. Together, those deaths took an enormous emotional toll on everyone at Neema House, but especially on Cheryl, perhaps. Also, a huge part of Cheryl's responsibility reaches far beyond Neema House and into the villages a long distance from Geita. She does home visits for children who have been returned to their families to check up on their welfare. She does home visits of prospective adopting parents. And by the way, adoption is a relatively new idea there in Geita. And she does home visits for families who are being subsidized with formula so that they can keep their own infants at home. I'd like to share about one visit which is fairly typical. We drove out to a small village until the very holy, bouncy road became impassable by car. The family came out to meet us, and they led us to their apartment, as word had spread that we were making our way there. We entered a small room with only material covering the door and window, no electricity, as most of the homes there do not have electricity. And there was one small love seat and 4 chairs in this small room with a coffee table between the love seat and 2 chairs. Now, when you visit someone over there, you are an honored guest. They will make you a meal, no matter how little they have for their own family, which the mother of this family immediately started to work on while we visited with the father and the child we'd come to see. When it was finished, a young girl about 6 or 8 years old came out, and she brought a large bowl and a pitcher, and she held the bowl while pouring water over each of our hands so that we could cleanse them for the meal. Then she brought out the meal and the dishes. We ate, and to be respectful, we had to have seconds because we would not have been polite if we had not shown our enjoyment by taking seconds. Only the father and child we came to visit ate with us. The mother and the other children did not come in the room, except for serving. This kind of hospitality was very hard on Cheryl initially. She knew these families barely had enough to feed themselves, as we were taking care of their malnourished children at Neema House, and but they still wanted to share what they did have. She hated having to visit them, as her social work requires her to do, because she hated having to eat up their food. She eventually learned she could take them a gift. A big bag of rice and a big bag of beans makes a great gift, as that is their staple food. So after the meal, the entire family and most of the neighborhood escorted us back to the car. And there Cheryl was able to give the gift of food to the mother, and that was acceptable and not offensive. And that's how she's started treating most of her visits. She carries that food when she knows they're going to feed her.
And I want to mention a burial that I participated in. It was a second baby that died. I went with Cheryl and Lucas, the manager there, to pick up the baby's body at the hospital and take it to the home of the father. The father actually met us at the hospital, and then we went with him to his home. It was an apartment that was 6 by 8. That was his apartment as well. His neighbors gathered around him, and one of the men in the neighborhood took the lead, rounded up several of the ladies, and dressed the baby girl for burial. And the baby that was then wrapped in a blanket. This all happened the same day the baby died, by the way. The father then went with the rest of the neighborhood to the cemetery, and we went with the cemetery, and the father and the men dug the grave beside the baby's mother's grave, who had died 2 weeks earlier. And then the father very gently laid the baby into the bottom of the grave and made sure that it was laying right and smooth. And then everybody there participated in covering the baby with soil, with dirt. A prayer was led. I led the prayer, and Lucas translated it into Swahili, and then we departed. It was a very simple service, but I was really impressed at the community response and participation. I just felt like it was done with a great sense of caring and dignity, and I was proud to be a part of it. We probably ought to own up to the fact that it wasn't all work and drudgery, though. We did, after all, take a few days to go on safari to the Serengeti. And the Serengeti is actually a pretty big park. It's a wildlife park, and it's larger than the country of Rwanda. We ventured into the park and stayed 2 nights in the park in a lodge. And yes, we saw quite a few animals, different kinds. But perhaps best of all, we were able to experience this adventure with Cheryl and Scott and our 4 delightful grandsons.
And of course, we were able to enjoy Christmas with them and toward the end of our visit, and also with the children at Neema House. Okay, if you have any more questions, we would be glad to share more of our experiences later, as this was just the tip of the iceberg.
Thank you. And she's right. There's no way we can tell you everything that happened, but it was a trip that we felt was very well worth having made. And we appreciate your part in helping make that possible by giving us the time off to do that. And it was an exhausting 4 weeks, but it was a very, very good 4 weeks. And I had a better sense of what kind of work that we are involved in there. And it is a very significant work, and I'm just proud as can be that we have a part in that. And if you need to respond in any way, one of our shepherds will be in the office just down the hall. Now, we do have one gentleman planning to be baptized this morning, so immediately after our dismissal, we will have Rand here with us, and he will make his confession that he believes in Jesus Christ, and then we will share in his baptism. And those of you that can stay for that, I'd encourage you to stay for that as well. Let's pray. Our Father, we come thanking you for today, and we thank you for our life. We thank you for this mission that is doing a good work in Tanzania. We thank you for the people of Tanzania and for their gracious receptivity of the efforts that are being put forth. Guide us in all that we do and all the works we do, Father, abroad and locally here. It is in your Son's name we pray. Amen.